In the 2nd century BCE, the former Han dynasty successfully consolidated a massive, geographically diverse territory under a single imperial administration. But the new bureaucracy faced an immediate logistical hurdle. They had to govern this territory using the legal and ritual texts inherited from the preceding Zhou period. These ancient documents were riddled with archaic vocabulary and fractured by centuries of divergent regional dialects, making consistent interpretation of laws and customs nearly impossible for the new magistrates. The state's solution relied on a core Confucian principle known as Zhengming, or the rectification of names. Zhengming dictates that terms must be defined precisely and used correctly to maintain a functioning, orderly society. For the Han court, establishing correct language was the necessary first step to asserting political and social control over a newly unified population. The tool they built to achieve this was the area, translating to approach to correct expressions. It functioned as a definitive lexicographic database. Traditional accounts often claimed the text was authored by the Duke of Zhou or the early disciples of Confucius. Historical evidence points instead to the members of the former Han National University, or Taishui. These state scholars were strictly tasked with teaching the Confucian classics, and they needed a centralized, standardized reference to ensure uniform instruction across the bureaucracy. The area was engineered by the empire's highest academic body to mechanically convert the philosophical mandate of Zhengming into an operational reality. The resulting text is divided into 3 zhuan, or scroll volumes, organizing vocabulary into 19 distinct semantic fields. Its architecture is rigorously uniform. Every single chapter title begins with the exact same character, shi, meaning explaining. This diagram represents the text's 19 chapters. The first 3 blocks decipher archaic vocabulary from classical poetry. Chapters 4 through 7 categorize human affairs, kinship, architecture, utensils, and music. The remaining 12 chapters categorize the physical environment, mapping flora, fauna, and geography. By structuring the text this way, the scholars mapped the boundaries of the Han universe. Mastering the classics meant holding a complete taxonomy of reality. In its early sections, specifically Chapter 1, Shi Gu, the area functions as a synonymicon. Ancient texts contained multiple archaic words scattered across various poems, all loosely relating to the concept of starting or beginning. This node graph visualizes the problem. The text gathers disparate historical metaphors, including terms for sprout, head, base, and embryo. It then forcefully collapses all 11 variations into a single functional definition, shi, meaning to start. This same process was applied to the language of statecraft and law, standardizing words used to describe what is regular. For example, the archaic term for a bronze vessel, which traditionally carried a physical inscription of law, was mapped directly to the concept of an unchanging standard rule. The text similarly groups words originally meaning mold, ruler, and pitch pipe into this exact same node for regularity. By compressing hundreds of chaotic historical metaphors into clean, definitive nodes, Han administrators turned the untranslatable poetry of the Zhou era into actionable bureaucratic data. As the text progresses to Chapter 4, explaining kinship, its utility changes from defining old words to prescribing exact social behavior. This logic tree maps the strict nomenclature. A wife calls her husband's father Ju and his mother Gu. While living, they are addressed as Junju and Jungu. Upon passing away, the required terms permanently shift to Shanju and Xianggu. Even a concubine of the husband's father is assigned a fixed node in this hierarchy, explicitly labeled as Shagu, or minor mother-in-law. Linguistic precision in Han kinship was an enforcement mechanism. Using the correct terms dictated the exact modes of ritual deference necessary to maintain a rigid social hierarchy. The final chapters apply this prescriptive logic to the state's physical assets, such as in Chapter 19, explaining domestic animals. The Han state categorized its livestock using hyper-specific morphological traits. The dictionary dictates that a horse with 4 white ankles is explicitly categorized as Tseng, while a horse with a white right hind leg must be recorded as Shang. An entirely separate term, long, is required for a horse simply possessing a white tail. These entries bypass classical poetry entirely, serving instead as a ledger for state logistics. Enforcing a standardized taxonomy for horses and livestock, allowed the central government to manage taxation, trade, and military supply lines across a continent-spanning empire without ambiguity. The lexicographic model established by the area proved highly effective for statecraft and scholarship long after the Han period. Its structure founded an entirely new genre of glossary dictionaries built on the exact same principles. This timeline illustrates how over the following centuries, scholars explicitly wrote supplements to the original text, eventually forming the 5 books of correct expressions, or wuya. Analyzing and expanding this framework grew into a dedicated academic discipline called yashui, or area studies, which remained active well into the 19th century. The sheer volume of this scholarship eventually required scholars to write meta-studies simply to synthesize the accumulated centuries of yashui literature. The members of the National University engineered the architectural blueprint for all subsequent Chinese classical scholarship. Yet the area could never truly be completed. It required endless generations of commentary to keep it functional. By the Eastern Jin and Tang dynasties, commentators had to append phonetic glosses just to ensure the archaic characters were still pronounced correctly by contemporary administrators. During the Song period, scholars wrote dedicated supplements focusing strictly on the biological chapters, updating the taxonomy as the known world expanded. And later Qing dynasty scholars applied rigorous textual criticism to repair physical errors and degradation in the surviving manuscripts. The area required 2,000 years of continuous maintenance because the Han dynasty isolated a strict mechanical reality. As an empire expands and evolves, the continuous rectification of its language is the only mechanism that can hold its bureaucracy together.